Chapter 22, The War. We were eating baked chicken and rice when Aunt Queenie said, "The advisory board has called an emergency meeting for tonight." Two thoughts collided in my brain. One, the meeting probably meant trouble for Avenel's dad. Two, I'd be home free with Mr. Roebuck's tapes because Uncle Bert had a deacon's meeting at church. Aunt Queenie clicked her nails on the table. Somehow it leaked out that Trezane was questioned about those burglaries. I don't understand it. Since Trezane wasn't charged, that information should have remained confidential. I made swirls in my rice with my fork. Telephone, telegraph, teletree. "I expect your meeting will last half the night," Uncle Bert said. "Mine should be over by 9. "Well, I declare, Del Rita," Aunt Queenie said, her painted-on eyebrows knitting together in a frown. "We're leaving you alone so much lately. I feel as though we're shirking our responsibility." I remembered how carefree Aunt Queenie had been after visiting her father in the hospital. I could still see her breezing in the door, singing, "I'm home," and carrying that bag of fried chinny. "Del Rita," she said, "is something wrong with your dinner?" "No, why?" "You've been chasing that bite with your fork for 5 minutes. I declare, here you are picking at your food in Land of Plenty, while the church sends supplies to people starving in Bangladesh." "Face it, Del Rita," I told myself, "you're a disappointment, a misfit, a project that isn't working out." I tried to swallow back the hurt, but it wouldn't go away. As soon as I was alone in the house, I zipped to my room so I could carve and listen to Mr. Roebuck's tapes. After setting up the recorder, I laid out items from my Barbie case. My crude magic marker sketch of Joey's bear reminded me of the wood carving term happy mistake. That's an accidental cut in the basswood that doesn't ruin the carving, but adds a surprising dimension to the piece. Today, I'd rediscovered a surprising dimension to Mr. Roebuck. Rough on the outside, but a happy mistake underneath. Thinking of that made me feel better. Made me forget for a while that I was a big disappointment to Aunt Queenie. I sat down, picked up my knife, and punched play. First came some buzzing and mumbling, and then the gravelly voice. "This is retired Master Sergeant Orvis Roebuck, U.S. Army Infantry, recording memories of World War II. Memories. Makes it sound like a picnic or a night on the town. Something pleasant you'd want to remember, but it sure as blank wasn't pleasant at all." I smiled at the little skip on the tape, where Mr. Roebuck had cleaned up some pollution. "I've never talked about the war before, but I reckon there's first time for everything. Might as well start at the beginning and tell you why I joined up. It was Leo Garrison's fault. Leo and me grew up on neighboring farms, and when we weren't helping our dads in the fields, we were exploring caves, fishing, skinny dipping. Halloweens, we tipped over the neighbors' outhouses, and once we had run like the devil when Elvin Moon caught us painting his cow green. We kept working the farms after we finished school, because that's all we really knew. And then the United States entered World War II. Folks everywhere gathered around the radio at night listening to the news. Leo took it personal when it sounded like the Allies were losing ground. He kept threatening to go sign up, although as a farmer he wouldn't have to go. One day he went to town and enlisted. Since I couldn't talk him out of it, I enlisted too. Couldn't have him leave me here in Missouri staring at the rear end of a blamed old mule. Mr. Roebuck talked about being trained as a heavy machine gunner, getting separated from Leo, letters from Rose, and censored mail. I was finishing the bear's snout when the tape stopped. I turned it over and hit play again. Soon Mr. Roebuck's voice took on a different tone. I stared at the recorder. He sounded breathless and excited. No, he sounded scared. I sat spellbound listening, the hair raised on my arms. That voice was transporting me from Tangleneck, Missouri to just off the coast of England at the dawn of D-Day. June 6, 1944. We were aboard a ship waiting for orders to cross the English Channel into Normandy. The sky was black with Allied planes taking off into the fog and wind and cold. Thousands of planes, fighters and C-47s, and their roar was like the wrath of God. For hours we stood on that deck and watched pure conflagration. Our planes were bombing and our ships were shelling. We knew the first wave of infantry was heading for the beaches. I was shaking in my boots and torn in 3 directions. Knowing I had to get in there and do my part to end the blasted war, itching to whip Leo for getting me into such a mess, wishing I was home and staring at that old mule's behind. Next day, June 7th, I found out my fear was justified. The first wave of troops had been lambs sent to slaughter. Big German guns blasted at their landing crafts, filling the sea with bodies. The survivors waded ashore in water red with blood. When our company's orders came at noon, we waded in with our guns held over our heads. Utah Beach it was, still slippery with blood. By then the Allies had tanks and bulldozers on the beach, but the Nazis were just beyond. For days and days we fought our way inland, with never a break from planes strafing overhead and the shrapnel falling. But the biggest danger was enemy snipers, hiding in an awful maze of hedgerows. One day I was hiding in a hedgerow myself on the outskirts of a village, had my gun trained on a house where we'd seen some Nazi activity. When I sensed that I was being watched, as I jerked around, a sniper's bullet ripped through my face, knocked me out cold. When I came to, I was on a bed in an old house, and an American rifleman was standing guard at the window. When we heard shooting outside, he moved me and the mattress to the floor, and I blacked out again. Next time I came to, the American was gone, and 3 Nazi soldiers were firing machine guns out the windows. I was hoping the Nazis would shoot me to stop the pain in my face. My right jaw was fractured, my top teeth on the left had been blown to bits, and the hole in my cheek burned like blank. I was lying in something sticky. I felt around, felt blood, felt another man's body, the rifleman. I was nearly out of my head with pain, so I don't know if the blood was mine or his. All I know is he was dead. There was blood on the mattress, on the floor, on the walls, on his body. So much blood. For 3 days they kept me on the mattress with the dead man. No water, no food. Lights from a car outside flashed at the edge of my window shade. I lifted the shade and saw Uncle Bert's Lincoln pulling into the drive. Crud, I said aloud. In the last few minutes, Mr. Roebuck's story had become more to me than a history assignment. I was itching to play the rest of the tape, but it was too risky now. I hid the recorder and got ready for bed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a bloody mattress. I gave up trying to sleep, hauled out the bear, and whittled its bandana. At 11:45, I was crawling back under the covers when Aunt Queenie came home. I jumped up and met her in the hall. How did it go? With a sigh, she slumped against the wall and slipped off her shoes. We voted to keep Trezane Shackelford on the job, but on probation for 30 days. Good deal. Yes, it is. I'm just too tired to appreciate it at the moment. Her crow's feet were prominent, and her top knot was drooping to one side. Sophie Breach would be happy to know she was showing her age. Aunt Queenie? Yes. You look beat. Why don't you sleep late in the morning? Why, declared Elrita, I couldn't do that. Seeing you off to school is my responsibility. There it was again, responsibility. Now that I knew the truth, the word was worse than a sore thumb for getting in the way. I'd never before played hooky from school, but I was tempted to do it Thursday morning so I could listen to Mr. Roebuck's tapes. No, what I really wanted was to sit with him and hear everything he knew about the war. When Aunt Queenie got a call asking her to work someone else's shift at the crisis center, I settled for visiting her father after school. At 3:30 on the dot, I was standing in his doorway, my eyes on the scar where the sniper's bullet had ripped through his face. Well, hello, girlie. I wasn't expecting you back so soon. I marched in and set the recorder beside him on the bed. Aunt Queenie is filling in at the crisis center. We're safe till 5 o'clock. He gave me that lopsided grin. Did you get anywhere on your report? Writing? No. Listening? Yes. I got up to the part where you, found the body of the rifleman. The grin turned upside down. Mr. Roebuck fingered the scar and stared at the wall with watery eyes. I figured he was seeing a bloody mattress. I'm sorry, I murmured. War is horrible, he said to the wall. Good men die. Brave men. Men like that rifleman and my friend Leo. He wiped his forehead with a red handkerchief, then let it slide across his eyes. I drew a deep breath and ventured. Mr. Roebuck, yesterday you told me if I'm willing to talk, you're willing to listen. Does that road run both ways? Are you willing to talk and let me listen? What are you getting at, girlie? Tell me what happened after you got shot. I want to hear the story now, not wait till it's safe to play the tapes. I want it straight from the horse's mouth. His eyes bored into mine. I didn't dare blink or breathe. Why? He asked. Because I've been thinking about it since last night, and I've got to know. It's the first time I ever saw the human side of war. He mopped his forehead again. He coughed. All right, girlie. I'll tell you the rest of it, face to face. Tape what I say if you need to, but don't distract me by taking notes. And one more thing. When you write about me, get it straight. I nodded and reached for the tape recorder, but I had no doubt I'd get it straight. The bullet in the face, the bloody mattress, the dead rifleman were stamped on my brain in indelible ink. I fast-forwarded the tape to a blank spot, then stood still, waiting for Mr. Roebuck to gather his thoughts. His eyes were distant now, his hands twisting and untwisting the handkerchief. At last he motioned that he was ready. I punched the right button on the recorder and eased myself into a chair. I was so weak from pain and blood loss and lack of water, he began. I just lay there waiting and hoping to die. On the 4th day, a Nazi officer came to the house, babbling. Interrogate! I'll never forget his shiny jackboots stomping toward me, crunching through broken glass. I thought I was a goner then, and it came to me that I wanted to live. The officer tried to question me, but he couldn't speak very good English, and I couldn't say much but gibberish. He finally just kicked me in the ribs and barked some orders at the soldiers. They hauled me off to some sorry excuse for a hospital. Dirty, no antibiotics, no medicine at all except some bluish ointment. Hair fell out from high fever. Infection raised big blisters on my body that broke and then swelled up again. The prisoner's food was moldy black bread and broth. I couldn't eat the bread because it made me bleed to chew. The broth was nasty, real nasty. Probably made from dog or cat or horse meat. What was worse, we could smell the food the Nazis ate. Chicken and eggs and fresh vegetables. They must have plundered every farm in the countryside. The fighting was never far away. Heard big guns going off every night, and in the mornings the air was full of smoke. I was slowly starving to death and too weak to lift my head, so when Leo showed up, I thought I was hallucinating. I didn't even know he was in that half of the world, but there he was with his left leg all shot up. When he saw the shape I was in, he vowed that somehow he'd help me. Of course, I figured he was just in shock and talking crazy. He was a prisoner too, with only one good leg. How could he help me? I couldn't take my eyes off Mr. Roebuck. I was a prisoner myself, captivated by his story. My chest felt tight from shallow breathing. Turned out, Leo was a miracle God sent to me. He came up with a pair of crutches and he found another patient who knew a little something about dentistry. That fellow wired my jaws shut so I wouldn't keep breaking open the hole in my face. The next morning, Leo showed up with 2 raw eggs and poured the slimy things down my throat. Thus went on for a couple more days, and when I had the strength to do it, I asked him about those eggs. Seems some of the guards were pretty lax because they didn't expect a bunch of half-dead men to cause them any trouble. Leo had been slipping into the kitchen at night and helping himself to eggs. No more, I said. Too dangerous. But he wouldn't stop. Gotta do it, he said. You do the same for me. Mr. Roebuck's voice cracked on the last 2 words. The cords in his neck were quivering and he was wheezing violently. I inched close to the call button at the head of the bed in case I had to ring for a nurse. For a while he couldn't speak. The tape recorder roared softly, a counterpoint to the wheezing. Finally he rasped. For almost 2 weeks I lived on raw eggs, and then one morning Leo was gone. Just disappeared. I waited and prayed more than I'd ever prayed in my life, but I knew in my heart the guards had shot him. Tears ran in rivulets down Mr. Roebuck's cheeks. He wiped them away with the back of his hand. I felt tears in my own cheeks, felt my nose running. I needed a tissue from that box on the nightstand, but I was afraid to move. If I broke the spell, he might send me away so he could cry in private. Mr. Roebuck was staring at the handkerchief as if he'd never seen it before. Then he came to himself and blew his nose. Sorry, girlie, he said. I'll get through this if it's the last thing I do. I reached for a tissue and blew my nose, too. 2 days later, the Allies liberated the village. When they carried me out on a stretcher, I was stinking and filthy. They flew me to a hospital in England, patched me up, and sent me back to the States, and that's where I was when the war ended. For Leo, the war ended back in that little village. I was helpless and dying, and he saved my life. I was the turtle he set off the post. To this day, I haven't figured out why Leo was the one who had to die. He was a hero, a much better man than me. Chest heaving, Mr. Roebuck turned his face into his pillow and closed his eyes. So there you are, girlie, he said weakly. I'm done. Take that gizmo when you leave and don't bring it no more. I've said all I'm going to say about that dadlamn war. I shut off the recorder. I wanted to comfort Mr. Roebuck, but I knew instinctively this was not the time. Nothing I could say would ease the pain he was feeling now. I sat by his bed until his breathing leveled out, and soon the rhythmic movement of his chest told me he was sleeping. Carrying the tape recorder, I tiptoed to the door and cringed at the squeak when I opened it. Hold it right there, girlie! I spun around. Yes, sir. You've got your war story. Does that mean you won't be coming back? Do you want me to? You bet I do. You don't need a walker, you're not shriveled as a prune, and you haven't lost your ironing board. Now there's a compliment if I ever heard one, I said. Then I snapped a salute and quoted General Douglas MacArthur, I shall return.